Welcome to the Capstone Conversation, the East Bay's best podcast. Hosted by Jared Asch, bringing you in-depth conversations with the leaders shaping your community.
Today, we are joined by Assemblywoman Ana Maria Avila Farias. Yes. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate you being here. You represent a good portion of Contra Costa County and a very diverse portion of Contra Costa County. Tell us who you are and what is your vision for your time and service here?
Great. Thank you for having me on. And it's always a wonderful opportunity to be able to share who I am as an individual, a community member, outside of being with the title of a legislator. I'm a third generation Contra Costa County resident, grew up in Contra Costa, have very deep roots there. My home base is Martinez. I represent 18 of the 19 cities. I have the bulk. I'm the only legislator that only has one county, and I'm very thankful for that. And it goes from the Carquinez Straits out to the Delta as far end as Brentwood and as far west as Crockett. Very diverse each city and have a little sliver of even Walnut Creek. It's a little bit of everything, right? The diversity, the economics, and each city has its own unique circumstances and challenges that I feel very equipped to be able to not only legislate, but I really know my district because I grew up in it and my professional career was in housing and community development. I know it even beyond just the visual community assessment. I know it from a land use and planning and economic and community development perspective. And which makes being in the legislature really exciting when you can get in the weeds like that in your community and also have the history to tie to why you understand the policy of your own community. And professionally, I spent 30 years in local government. I worked at the county, state, and federal level. My background has been in housing and community development. Of my 30 years of public service in government, I'm not elected. I say public service of my paying. My career has always been in serving the public in a paid capacity. In my professional career was working in housing and community development divisions and housing the most vulnerable of California and Contra Costa. I had the distinguished honor of working for Willie Brown when he was mayor in San Francisco in his housing and community development division, and then also worked with Gavin Newsom when he was the mayor. I kept my chops in housing policy really in San Francisco County, and then it expanded to the greater Bay Area, practiced in Alameda, Contra Costa. And somewhere, not to age myself in those 30 years, Jerry Brown appointed me to serve at the California Housing Finance Agency Board and was reappointed by Gavin Newsom before I came to the legislature. And I spent over a decade doing housing finance and development at the state level. And before I stepped off the board to come to the legislature, I had financed over $5 billion in affordable housing development throughout the state of California. And not only do I know the region well, I know the rest of the state because of that perspective of financing and utilizing state resources to build housing in very needed areas. We're proudly raising my children. I just have a recent graduate from high school, my 17, and have a sophomore incoming junior. And not too long from now, by the end of this second term, hopefully, I'll be looking at being an empty nester legislator. It's going to be very different. That's very, I think, of all my titles I've ever held, the most important title to me has been being a mother. And it's been great raising my kids and having them be part of my public service and my journey. And then my husband is an architect and has been in higher ed in the capital facility sides of higher ed and also a big giver of his time to our community. So the Farias family, beyond being in the legislature, have been very involved in my community in many levels, from school boards to just being civically engaged. And we've instilled that in our children.
I think that's great. And I want to pick up on the children thing first. As the father of three young daughters, I find it interesting, right? There's at least three powerful women that I can think of in the East Bay that commute to the legislature with young kids at home. And it's inspiring how you find that balance, because I know it's not easy with the amount of hours and the commute to Sacramento and everything else. If you have any advice to working moms and other families out there, Here's an open-ended opportunity.
As a parent, it's really hard in this economy and depending where you work and who you work for, right? It all starts with who your employer is and being able to manage your home life and managing your own professional job. And I've always been a working parent. I did not have the privilege of being a stay-home mom, which a lot of us, I think, whether it's the mom or the dad, we miss out on our children growing up. But the cost of living in California forces many of us to have to go to work and try to figure out or bring closer. For example, in my younger days before I had children, I was able to commute to San Francisco and do different things. And then once our children came, that no longer was a priority, that no longer was appealable to me to be on the road for an hour and a half when I had the desire to be home sooner and quicker, and recalibrated my life to get closer to home and made the sacrifice too, where my husband, where his economic opportunity would increase, then we would swap. And throughout our careers, when I look back the last 18 years, it's a partnership between your spouse of who is going to carry the burden and at what point. And we've had different roles. We've swapped where I paused my career to come closer to the kids and do different jobs and vice versa. And it's been fine. And here we're reversing again that he's on home base while I'm in
Mhm.
Sacramento. And it's only doable when you have that support system. And I'm very fortunate to have that support system with my husband. And then my children, they know no different. Sebastian, my oldest, has been around politics since the moment he was born. I was pregnant with him when I served on the planning commission. And I always tease him that he is my public service baby because everybody remembers me being pregnant with him, serving on the dais of the planning commission. And I think those moments of being able to balance and being a legislator now and looking at my career and not only my career, but all the spaces that I've served, it's always been through the lens for my children that I always wanted to mirror, that I didn't want to have excuses that I didn't contribute to my community or to a problem to try to solve, whether it was on a non-elected role, such as being a PTA mom or being on a planning commission. We have always colored our life of serving in some shape or form, or even in our community church. And by default, those community activities resulted in me getting civically engaged. And then I would have never imagined that one day I was going to end up in the state legislature. But here I am.
That's great, though. It talks about how everybody evolves as a family and as an individual to make a great legislator. Let's talk about housing. You have a life in housing and development. You have a number of bills in the state legislature this year on housing and streamlining process. Talk about what your priorities are there and what you're focused on doing in the next year if these bills move forward.
My first term has been pretty successful as a freshman. My first year, I was pretty aggressive and ambitious and trying to learn the space and ran maybe too many bills, but I learned a lot, right? And it was like drinking out of a fire hose. Ran 24 bills in different spaces. My specialty area of housing, 7 of them were housing bills. Played with education, behavioral health, and tribal, and got to sit in different committees and present these things and learned a lot of different dynamics and how they all operate. This year we had 11 bills that were taken through with the theme of housing. I think if the voters desire and I'm here the full 12 years, my goal is to continue to lead in the space that was my subject matter expertise of housing and community development. My utopia is that we clear up the backlog of construction of homes and get building more homes in California, create more financing tools for today's modern California that it's beyond two incomes to sustain a home, but create lending products that meet today's needs, right? And especially for younger families and having different product types. When you or I bought our homes, it's not really necessarily what people desire because of either commutes or lifestyles that we don't need the big yards anymore, right? We just need a good, safe, quality housing. And I think California is reshaping and reimagining what is the new California dream of homeownership, what that looks like. It's not the big 4,000 square foot home with a white picket fence anymore, right? The sustainability of that. It's exciting to be front and center of that to redefine what that's going to look like. But I hope at the end of my 12 years that production is back on track, that there is a canvas of diversity of home options for people. If you want to be a renter, wonderful. If you want to be a homeowner, and the type of size home that you want to live in, and that there's enough inventory and product that meet everyone's income ranges. And at the same time, being thoughtful in legislation that we take care of the most vulnerable populations as well. And I'm thinking in particular our seniors that are aging and may not necessarily want to live in a over 2,000 square foot home and free that up for a family, and then having the appropriate housing amenities for an aging constituent in our communities. And then the entry point, right? That right out of college, you may not want that big home, but you may want a studio or a condo, an affordable condo option. That if I can look back and take care of the front end and the back end, I think I would have been successful as a legislator because I understand the housing economic ladder and I know what levers need to be pulled and where we need to lean into. And there's a lot of work to build consensus and to adequately fund these programs that we need desperately. And this year I did a lot more district centered. We did housing. I did some childcare bills, and things are moving through committee and made it off the assembly floor and are headed over into the Senate House. And I'm really excited about that, that I think it's coloring who I am as a legislator, that I care about tabletop issues, that I care about everyday people trying to survive California and trying to raise a family in particular, and to have hope that when we age, that the social infrastructure is there to house us as well.
Debbie, off a shout out to you, Choice and Aging, for being a loud voice in our community about that. Hey, I can't speak for everybody else. I would love a 4,000 square foot house on an acre of property, though. It's that middle ground that we're looking for in the Bay Area. Let's talk, let's dive into this housing a little bit more with some of your bills. In that 12 years, what do you think is going to actually move the needle? We've had a dozen bills in the last couple of years to reform housing. What's working? What's not? What do you think is the next step to really get these results and get this vision you're talking about?
The speaker appointed myself and my colleague, John Herbinian, to chair a affordable housing select committee. The last year, we have been meeting with stakeholders from the construction side to the land use side to city planning to the developers to the financing. And I'm hoping to have a set of recommendations provided to the speaker. That's number one of what I think is collectively with the community, what we need to do. But some of the things we teased out, I think one thing that needs to happen is California really needs to think about how we're going to do our infrastructure, right? How are we burdening developers with, in order to build, they have to go through an entitlement permitting process. And sometimes that's cost prohibitive, right? If you go into a community that did not benefit from redevelopment, it's an aging infrastructure. And just for Disney math, if you were going to go in and go build 8 units, it could cost you 8 million or 10 million, who knows, whatever the cost, depending what community you're in. But then on top of that, you have close to 300,000 or 400,000, or if not a million, in impact mitigation fees to even get the shovel started or get your planning permits. One utopia that I think we should have, especially if we're building affordable housing, that California should look at an infrastructure bond to finance infrastructure throughout the state of California, that our developers are not burdened that. It just happens to be that they want to do economic community development, revitalize, and it happens to be that it's housing, and then we saddle them with building the whole infrastructure around that. Is that really fair and equitable? And I don't think that's fair and equitable that they are responsible for having to build the city's infrastructure on or tax. I don't know what it would look like, but I think we should explore that to relieve that cost pressure, to incentivize more developers to want to come into communities and do what their expertise is building. I think that's one bucket. The other bucket, in the absence of that big lift and what's going to take financial mental acrobats to see how does this get financed? How does this work statewide? But in theory and concept, that's kind of what I think we need to be exploring and teasing out. Second to that, to alleviate cities complaining, because another vision, and I tried to run a bill last year, was removing impact fees for affordable housing. I was trying to test the market, said most cities aren't building affordable housing because it's cost prohibitive and there's not enough tax credits and financing tools out there. What if we took away the fees to incentivize the private sector developers to want to come through and build the infill projects? And I'm not thinking of the big 100 unit plus. I'm thinking of the 10 plex to 50 units. It makes a big difference on their financial performa if they don't have to pay impact fees. Maybe that will incentivize them wanting to build these units. It didn't get it very far because obviously the League of Cities and other stakeholders that rely on those fees, especially public safety, would not work, even though I said, I'm just trying to test it for 3 years. Let's see if that is a problem. I'm trying to diagnose the problem of why production isn't happening. What if I did a bill at sunset in 3 years? And if thousands of unit applications come through, then we know that's a hindrance, right? But if nothing happens, nobody loses anything. No one wanted to play with that risk of it happened or not. It's hard to diagnose problems when we're not testing the market, but is really happening. But those were some of the ideas that I had, was dealing with the infrastructure, dealing with how we do permitting, in addition to the banking side, figuring out we need more tax credits. We can do more lending. I served on the California Housing Finance Agency board. One of the projects that I worked on was kicking off the accessory dwelling unit project that when there was financing for it, we got over 2,500 applications of people wanting financing to build those. I think that's a missed middle market that many of us who do have the acreage because of certain areas that we live in, whether in the Bay Area, can build these secondary units that can house not only aging parents, but boomerang kids coming back from college. And it is by design an affordable housing opportunity if we can get more of these finance. And looking at tools that, we need more technical assistance. It's not an everyday person that can walk in and say, hey, how do I add another unit to my house? Building capacity around that, getting the engineering and architects involved early and having resources for community members and helping them navigate the city planning permitting process. In addition to creating a lending product that allows, my utopia would be to have a standalone lending product. Because right now, I don't know how much, and you can stop me because I tend to nerd out in this space because that's where I spent most of my career, is that if you want to build something onto your home, you either have to do it through an equity line or refinance your house and take cash out. And I envision a project that you don't have to, because many people in the Bay Area took advantage of the opportunity to have very low interest rates, where you could keep your low interest rate, but have a standalone project of a loan to build a construction loan to build that second unit on your house. And I think that's where innovation and forward thinking of how traditional lending works, or you don't have to attach it as securing to your first mortgage or disrupting your first mortgage in a very unaffordable state. Those are just the things that I would like to tease out in the finance side and the construction side, because I think desperate times require desperate measures, and it should not be legislating in a vacuum. We need to do it more cohesively as a legislature. And we need to look, over 100 bills have passed around housing, and we're still in a housing crisis. Going back and assessing which ones on the books are helpful and which ones are not helpful, and let's get rid of them or improve on them now that they've been on the books 5 years or a decade, right? It's time to reassess and see what works and what doesn't work.
I think that's good. What's the process to assess and reassess those?
The speaker, I think last year before the end of session or the beginning, had said that he was going to open up a select committee to revisit bills, not necessarily in housing, but the general concept of revisiting bills and assess how they're doing and how they're performing. And I think it's really following up on that and legislators and embracing that, to not have their feelings hurt in it, right? Because when you do a bill, you think it's perfect, right? And can you imagine if I legislated it and someone picked up my bill and said, Anna Marie, your bill wasn't great, we want to tweak it. Getting that comfort zone that it's okay. Nothing is perfect the first time we roll it out. And if it is, wonderful. But if it's not, don't be offended by having a relook or a revisit how it's being deployed now that it's law.
Because you're deploying it for 40 million people and it was a concept in theory. And I think your point about the extensions of loans in people's houses, we have a ton of friends in your district that are looking at how do they add to 1,400, 1,800 square foot houses because they're locked into those lower rates. And how do you create that additional space, either in your immediate house or an in-law unit or an ADU? And I think it makes sense to at least approach that conversation from that.
No, I'm very excited. When I talk to bankers in the finance industry, they I think how the role the state can play is it's all about collateral, right? That we do seconds because if you default on that equity, they're able to recover by taking your home. I think the nuance here is there's another asset and having the state be collateral. People are not going to default on their primary homes from building a secondary unit. And I think securing the market in some shape or form with the state coming in as that silent second in the background of the assurance that lend and then think about the economic opportunity. It creates more construction jobs and it contributes to the economy depending what people are using these units for, and it's also soft income for people that if you do rent it to someone who can't really afford a home yet, or it's cheaper than an apartment or a house to rent, that they're also contributing to the housing stock and the affordable housing stock.
I want to come back to the childcare that you started mentioning. Childcare affordability comes up everywhere in the Bay Area, I'm sure throughout the entire state. How are you looking at that? What legislation are you looking at? How do we recruit more workers into this? How do we make it affordable for working parents? Because
Yeah.
you have to pay the workers what they want. That's the biggest trigger, the rents. What are your thoughts on addressing this?
This year's bills are definitely big lift bills. And I know uh, in a budget deficit that those big lifts weren't going to be happening. And I scaled back my utopia. I'll start from the big picture and then the scale back versions. The big picture was an utopia in the theme of affordability, because my theme is how do we make California more affordable for everyday people, right? And everyday people is the working class in particular trying to raise children in California. And while I won't be a beneficiary of that, you never forget that that's a scar wound as a parent, right? Trying to find affordable, safe, quality childcare for your child. That is the most important thing that you do second to making the decision of having children. And the fact that we don't have enough childcare centers and affordable childcare centers is troubling to me, being the fourth largest economy. And my utopia is that we have universal childcare, that we have and it would look different, that corporate headquarters, that we ask them to, through a tax credit, that they build on-site childcare centers for their employees, that we locate and increase capacity at school campuses that are already designed for children-centric environments of safety, that we expand those childcare centers to children that aren't in school yet, and then obviously deploying more of the childcare centers within our community. And one of my bills that I did last year was allowing home childcares to be created by right, not having to go through the entitlement process. It's a multi-pronged approach, but again, the utopia is the bigger picture, that we find the mechanism to fund universal childcare where you as a parent have a choice of where you're going to take your child and it's completely subsidized by the state, and we have a funding mechanism. And we're not there yet, right? Because we're in a budget deficit. It's hard to find a funding mechanism at the moment, and bringing all the stakeholders. This year I ran the bill with the big utopia and then scaled it back. And the my ask turned into a childcare bill that increased capacity and using funds in the state budget that were not used or underutilized, and reallocating those to reinvest to increase more childcare capacity. I will continue to legislate in childcare until I get to that utopia with our stakeholders that we need to have universal childcare for affordability reasons.
And what you're talking about doesn't happen overnight. I like the short and long-term vision. Let's pivot and talk about refineries. You have a very unique district you have three big refineries in your district, a fourth just over the water from you. What is the impact of that on the economy of your district? And then from that, I'd love to just talk about how to find that balance of the clean energy, but yet we still have a lot of people the majority, who drive gas cars.
This is a really interesting topic. Number one, I'm not a subject matter expert in the space, but I've had to learn it and the reason is because my district is home to 60% of California's refineries. It is 40, creates 40% of the production to the airport jet fuel. We are a very important district from an economic perspective. That being said, as being in the Bay Area, people have a love-hate with the industry. And I could be a legislator that says, I'm just the housing lady, childcare, tabletop issues. And I actually believe that energy is a tabletop issue of affordability, because if you can't drive to your childcare center or to your job because gas is now $15 or $20 a gallon, we have a problem. And when I started to assess what kind of legislator I wanted to be, I wanted to be a legislator that I was not scared to embark on topics that were not popular for people, depending what camp you were in, and especially on the environmental camps. And I chose not to be colored by that, of being fearful to educate myself in a space that's important. And I've been on an education journey the past year. And when I say education journey, was let me pull back the curtain and learn about the footprint of the industry in California and in my district in particular, and what is fact and what is fiction, and where do I need to lean into in public policy to be the ambassador. I'm not here to convince you. I'm here to provide you with information for you to draw your own conclusion. And as my constituent, you can then agree or disagree with me in the way I'm going. But my interest is making sure that we all that we all are operating on the accurate information of the state of affairs of our energy, and in particular to the refineries. And the state of affairs is, as you stated eloquently, we are the third largest consumer of petroleum. We are heavily reliant on it. And we are very fortunate that we still have production here in California and that we don't have to import. And we take crude and turn it into the best, cleanest petroleum to environmental standards. And I would prefer, because I consider myself an environmentalist, that I would rather know that refiners are refining to California environmental standards than taking crude from a third world country that does not have the same environmental standards and then putting it on a tanker and bringing it thousands of miles across the ocean and creating its own economic and environmental impact that it would have on the environment, on the green. When I assess that as a community member, as a mother, that I thought, I don't want that, because that's not fair to have this production come from another country, that environmental impacts are happening because there's not the regulatory that we have, and yet we are the beneficiaries of it. And we went at one point, most people don't realize, we had 30 refineries in California, and now we're down to 7. And they're all in my district, predominantly very few in Southern California. And one of them was a former petroleum that went to biofuel. And I feel, being the home of John Muir, the environmentalist, that I could be a legislator that you can be for the environment, you can be for sustainable and renewable energy, that you can be both, that they don't have to operate independently, and you don't have to be villainized because you decide that you want to be both. And that's the lane that I'm in, is learning, being an ambassador of the energy footprint for California, the economy, and supporting innovation in industry, supporting the industry in the sense of what can they do to operate cleaner and where can they innovate to operate cleaner, until we are able to deploy a transition. And with what I have learned in this short period of a year and a half, I don't think I'm going to see a transition in my life. It may be my children. And setting the stage that we can platform to that would be wonderful. And which is why Phillips 66 is a very big interest to me. It's a refinery that transitioned to sustainable aviation fuel, doing biofuel. It's the only one in California, the only one nation. And I think it's really great cutting edge technology, beyond employing many people in my district and being a huge economic footprint and a great community partner, and their contributions of being socially invested in our community. But they're in jeopardy of not existing because the Trump administration removed the tax credits that allowed them to transition. And we as Californians have a choice. Do we want to invest in this type of innovation, or do we want to say, not our problem, let them close? I chose the latter, that I felt that You can't be a state of transition if you're not even willing to support the people who do the transition. And so I'm working very hard with my colleagues and the governor and stakeholders to hope to supplement those tax credits through the budget until we have a better administration in the future that values the environment and transition and supports companies that put the investment into their companies to transition. And then for the existing refineries, I think for them, they continue to operate and provide cleaner petroleum than anybody else, is allowing the regulatory oversight to allow them to innovate and upgrade their facilities with latest technologies. They don't, expend greenhouse gases and do lower emissions, not increase capacity, but increase their ability to innovate and bring better resources to their process.
We've talked about this on past episodes. The pollution that the refineries here admit compared to refineries in Texas is significantly less. It's significantly cleaner on top of the whole Phillips 66 and the green
Right.
biofuels for aviation. And people just don't realize that. They're just this anti-refinery, it's oil, but there's this balance to support that innovation. And I liked how you talk about the mix of approach and complimenting people who are trying to innovate and trying to be clean within it.
Yes. And I think that's what we should be known as, right? Being the leaders in innovation and sustainability and also being protectors of the environment. You can be all of that in one. It's not one or
Yes.
the other. And that's the type of legislator that I want to be for Contra Costa and embody our environmental constituents and also embody our workers that train in these facilities and also the companies that operate. And I think we have stopped listening to each other and we have vilified this industry despite being large consumers. And I always ask people that even if our utopia, we all have our utopia, that if we could today wave a magic wand and say, you're bad for the environment, shut down, go away, it's at what expense, right? It's, I always do the sample of people. If there's 20 of us in here, if that were to happen, then we all have to be in a financial position to go buy an electric car that on average are $60,000. If you have that type of disposable income to do that, wonderful. Then secondly, we're all going to fight if we all live in the same community. I would have to think in my brain, if I live in Martinez, where can I go charge my car? Right. That when what time do I need to go? Because obviously charging stations are going to become higher in demand if there's no more gas. Right. And then lastly, people forget that you don't do that abruptly pull the cord without the infrastructure. And California has simply not invested in the EV infrastructure that you cannot get from Northern California to Southern California and having accessible EV stations. And then, and not, definitely not enough for all of us to transition all at a flip of a switch. There's a lot of infrastructure investment that needs to happen. And we have not invested in the way we needed to really execute on that transition.
And I know we're almost out of time, but this is 2026. This is the year of immigration and ICE as a topic. And I know you've addressed this through a couple of bills. Do you want to talk through a couple of bills and what you're trying to do?
So I have several bills. They both came through committee and got off the assembly floor and are headed over to the Senate. My AB 1627, the melt ice bill, is really exciting. It prohibits law enforcement from recruiting any agent that came from the ICE that was viewed having as a bad record and has documented performance issues and outrageous abuses, that we make sure that when the ICE activity ends, that these people don't end up working on our law enforcement agencies in our community because they have not shown that they are worthy of serving our community in that way and had done some outrageous abuses. But it would exclude them from being able to, just like we already have in the law, we exclude felons from being in law enforcement. This is now adding that a bad performing ICE agent cannot just come be a police officer in California. And the other two is prohibiting ICE activity at polling areas to prevent voter intimidation and childcare centers. Because as we saw nationally some very unpleasant scenes that unfolded of children being separated from their parents. Both those bills moved on, and I'm really excited and hopeful that we can create protections for our undocumented community members and even our regular community members of that are not in undocumented status from being racially profiled. We have a lot of racial profiling of people being accused, depending what ICE agents think is an undocumented community member. Those are important bills for the community. It's a safety net. And I got asked the question is, what evidence do you have that this is happening? And my response is, I don't need evidence, just like we didn't need the evidence of putting our seatbelt on is safer than driving around without a seatbelt. This isn't the same. I don't know what's going to happen, but let's hope that let's legislate in the event and it does happen. We are protecting our community members.
That's great. I appreciate you doing that. I know there's been a lot of topic here and talks on Contra Costa about that. Any final thoughts going out? Anything I haven't asked that you want to highlight about the work you're doing in the legislature or tips for our community?
I'm just really honored and humbled to be serving Contra Costa County and being in the district and being up here in Sacramento and staying very grounded and connected to my district. It's really easy to lose yourself up in Sacramento, but I have my district field reps and myself doing a lot of community engagement. I do monthly, if not weekly, when my schedule permits, meet and greets in coffee houses and meeting constituents throughout the district. I encourage people to come meet me and doing community events. In the fall, we did a harvest festival for kids. We gave out turkeys. We had a holiday festivity, gave out over 2,000 toys. And my office is very walkable and approachable. I'm not hidden in some skyrise. I want the district office to be the people's house where people feel that I'm accessible, not the Sacramento legislator, because I grew up in Contra Costa and I always want to be viewed as this legislator that grew up in this community and that you can always reach out to me and connect with me. And sometimes you may not be happy with what I do, but I'm always open for a discussion and strive to represent my district and you all in the best of my capacity through my lens as a mother, as a wife, as a sister, as a family, a community member of how I would want my quality of life to be. And I don't intentionally wake up wanting to do harm to my community, but I can understand when people feel that they don't like something. I haven't had it much. I only had it with my ICE bill of a constituent not being happy that I ran an ICE bill. And I welcome the dialogue to talk about it and have her understand the perspective of why I was running that. I feel I am a legislator for everyone, regardless of documented status, and that I felt this was important for our neighbors to have this done. And I hope, welcome criticism as well. And it's not a one-way street. And I'm open to hearing about things that once they are deployed, if they have unintended consequences, that only time would tell if my legislation was impactful or if it was the wrong. And I'm willing to be a legislator that says, let me go back and correct that or fix it. And that's what being out in the community is important to know how my legislation is impacting community members.
And I do need to give you credit. I have met you several times out in the community compared to other legislators, and your staff is very well represented. As a resident of Contra Costa, thank you for all that you're doing. I appreciate that. And thank you for being here today.
Thank you. I appreciate the time.
Thanks for listening to the Capstone Conversation. Don't forget to subscribe and follow Jared Asch and Capstone Government Affairs on LinkedIn. Leave us a review and share this episode with a friend.